The British Army, Colonel Francis Smith, had the arduous task of marching his soldiers back to Boston while being surrounded by hundreds, perhaps thousands of angry militia and minutemen lining up along the roadside. He sent out flankers to protect the main force as he marched out of Concord and down the road known as the Bay Road, aka Old Concord Road, the route that connected the towns of Concord and Lexington out towards the bay. The soldiers marched across the North Bridge without incident and headed towards the crossroads that were a mile away. The crossroads was known as Miriam's Corner, and the soldiers had to cross a small bridge that went over the Elm Brook. The protective flankers were brought back into formation in order to cross due to the heavy spring runoff. Around this time, Minutemen were taking sporadic pot shots at the soldiers from afar, but by the time the last of the soldiers crossed the bridge, some of them stopped to fire back. The Minutemen honed in on the redcoats' location and fired back, killing 2 and wounding a half dozen. Colonel Smith sent out flankers once more to protect the soldiers and to chase away the Minutemen from taking any more pot shots at the marching redcoats. After marching for another mile, the redcoats were greeted by 500 Minutemen at Brooks Hill, who decided to rain on their parade. The flankers that Smith sent out chased away some of them, but most of them remained and fired upon them, inflicting a large number of casualties. Further on down the road, the British soldiers were greeted by another large group of Minutemen, this time in an area known as Bloody Angle. They suffered even more casualties from the patriots as they lost over 30 men, while the attackers lost 4. The highly trained soldiers managed to run from the area, while a large mass of Minutemen couldn't chase them due to be so many of them concentrated in one area. Despite their hasty retreat, the British soldiers managed to regroup, and Colonel Smith sent out more flankers ahead to flush out the snipers out of hiding, but they had an even bigger problem now. The redcoats were running out of ammunition. Between the towns of Lincoln and Lexington, Captain John Parker and his militia set up an ambush for the British soldiers. Some of them were at the Battle of Lexington earlier in the morning. This action was known as Parker's Revenge. The ambush inflicted even more casualties on the British soldiers. Colonel Smith was shot in the thigh and fell off of his horse, leaving Royal Marine officer Major John Pitcairn to take command. He ordered Colonel Smith's light infantry units to clear out a couple of hills that were ahead of the main column. But the major was caught in another ambush and was tossed from his horse, injuring his arm. Without their 2 commanders, the soldiers were reaching their breaking point. They were tired, wounded, and nearly broken. A few of them surrendered to the Minutemen, while others broke rank and ran off to the nearby town of Lexington for safety. In a report to General Thomas Gage, written by Royal Marine Ensign Henry de Bernier, stated, "We began to run rather than retreat in order. We attempted to stop the men and form them too deep, but to no purpose. The confusion increased rather than lessened. The officers got to the front and presented their bayonets, and told the men if they advanced, they should die. Upon this, they began to form up under heavy fire." Another officer said, "There were very few men that had any ammunition left, and so fatigued that we could not keep flanking parties out, so that we must soon have laid down our arms or have been picked off by rebels at their pleasure. Nearer to, and we were not able to keep them off." Around 2:30, the British soldiers from Pitcairn's and Smith party were rescued by the 1,000 support soldiers that were under the command of Lord Percy. Reverend Joseph Thaxter, a former Minuteman, said this about the arrival of Lord Percy years later. "We pursued them and killed some, but when they got to Lexington, they were so close, pursued, and fatigued that they must have soon surrendered had not Lord Percy met them with a large reinforcement and 2 field pieces. They fired them, but the balls went over our heads." The British soldiers were angry with the way the Minutemen shot at them from behind walls, trees, and large rocks. They wanted them to fight the old style of open field combat. But Lord Percy had this to say about the fighting tactics of the Minutemen. "During the whole affair, the rebels attacked us in a very scattered, irregular manner, but with perseverance and resolution, nor did they ever dare to form into any regular body. Indeed, they knew too well what was proper to do so. Whoever looks upon them as a regular mob will find himself much mistaken. They have men amongst them who know very well what they are about, and having been employed as rangers against the Indians and Canadians, and this country being much covered with wood and hilly, is very advantageous for their method of fighting. Lord Percy, however, left Boston for Lexington without any spare ammunition, dismissing his master of ordnance's advice of doing so. He thought that the extra wagons for his cartridges and cannon fire would slow down his men. General Gage ordered 2 ammunition wagons to follow him after he left the city. The wagons were guarded by an officer and 13 soldiers. They were later ambushed by a group of elderly minutemen who shot the horses, killed 2 soldiers, and wounded their officer before the rest of the soldiers ran off. Due to Colonel Francis Smith and Major Pitcairn being incapacitated by their injuries, the soldiers were now under the command of Lord Percy. He commandeered the nearby Monroe Tavern and used it as a de facto headquarters for the British soldiers when they arrived in Lexington. The troops spent almost 2 hours there, tending to their wounded, along with having food and beverages. When one of the people who was working in the tavern was a Minuteman who participated in the Battle of Lexington. When he tried to leave, he was killed by some British soldiers. After the break, Percy ordered the troops to march out of Lexington and back to Boston. The soldiers marched in a defensive formation surrounded by flankers, with the wounded and the weary marching in the middle. He also had the Royal Marines out in front to sweep the area for Minutemen. The militia and patriots are now under the command of William Heath, a brigadier general in the ancient and honorable Artillery Company of Massachusetts. He gathered up all the local militia leaders and discussed strategy. They came up with a solution to Lord Percy's tactics of breaking the stranglehold that the Minutemen had along the road back to Boston. He ordered them to avoid close formations, not to get caught up in the redcoats' cannon fire, and to set up skirmish attacks around Percy's defensive square, basically hit and run on the British from a safe distance. General Heath and Dr. Joseph Warren led attacks on the redcoats as well, which highly motivated the patriots with their ambush on the Bay Road going into Menotomy. More and more militia and minutemen were taking part of the hit and run on the redcoats. Many of them were firing at the soldiers from 50 yards away, or acting like snipers and hitting them from rooftops and attics of local houses. By the time they reached the town of Menotomy, snipers were everywhere. A violent incident occurred at the Jason Russell House, where a house full of patriots shot it out with the British soldiers. 11 of them were killed, along with 2 redcoats. Soon the British soldiers began to lash out at the civilians. They ransacked several homes and businesses. The officers were unable to stop the soldiers who began to kill bystanders. By the time they marched into Cambridge, the fork of the road at the Watson's Corner, which led into Charlestown and Boston, the patriots and the redcoats were engaged in some serious fighting. Lord Percy ordered his men to stop and fire their cannons at the pursuing patriots, which by now numbered in over 4,000. The cannon fire inflicted some casualties, but not enough to keep them from chasing them. Instead of going to Boston, the British soldiers decided to march towards Charlestown, but their path was delayed by the dismantling of the Great Bridge, forcing them to use an alternate route through the town of Cambridge. The redcoats were surrounded by a large group of militia and minutemen in the area. To clear a path for his troops, Lord Percy ordered the cannons to be placed in the front and broke the Patriots' skirmish lines with cannon fire so they could continue on to Charlestown. The rear of the troops were guarded by Major Pitcairn's Royal Marines, which were the last of the British soldiers to engage in combat with the Patriots that day. Commander of the militias and the Minutemen, General William Heath, saw that the British soldiers were holding strong defensive positions in Charlestown, ordered the large contingent of patriots back to Cambridge to plan the next move. The soldiers in Charlestown were protected by the HMS Somerset, which are large guns which would have pounded the patriots' positions if they tried to move into the city. The next day, Boston was besieged by over 14,000 patriots. General Artemus Ward relieved William Heath as commander of the patriots and formed a siege line around Charlestown and Boston. The Massachusetts Bay Militia would besiege the city of Boston for the next 11 months. The British military suffered over 200 casualties, including 73 killed in action. The battles of Lexington and Concord were expected to be another police action like the powder alarm a year earlier, and nobody was expecting this kind of reaction from the colonists. The minutemen and militia suffered nearly 100 casualties, with 49 killed in combat. They surprised the world by fighting what many consider the best military on the globe and holding their own. But the battles of Lexington and Concord, along with the siege of Boston, will kickstart the American Revolution and the birth of the nation.